Good day everyone and welcome to my channel called Vintage Time. Today we're doing another live stream and we'll be in other questions and answers segments, so hopefully some people will join in later on. I'm doing this later in the evening. It's about 8 o'clock Australian time, so it will suit those people who are living in Europe more so than in the USA. So I'll just wait and then I'll start faceting. In today's live stream episode, I'll be still working on this Orbiter 10, but I'll be cutting some very small facets and I'll be doing that on copper with the diamond paste. So meanwhile, I'll just wait and see who joins in and have a sip of my tea. Then I'll start soon. Of course, a lot of people will be watching a delayed telecast of this live stream. Most likely they will be people in the USA. So you'll get to see that when you wake up tomorrow. So if any, I see there's 4 people who've joined, 5. Can someone just leave a reply? I don't see anyone currently online, but there seems to be 5 people. Hello, can anyone hear me? Hey Dean, how are you going? So I can see there's 5 participants and Dean has just joined me. Can you hear me, Dean? Just leave a little message. Orbiter 10, as I mentioned earlier. And basically, this will be a question and answer session again. I'm not going to be going as long as I normally do because I've had a pretty busy day gardening and I'll be pretty tired if I hang around for 2 or 3 hours. But if I half an hour to an hour, that would be really good. Hi, Tony. How are you going? So as I said earlier in the video, this will cater more for us Aussies and those people who live in the UK or anywhere in Europe. Obviously, those people who live in the US have got to see quite a few of my live streams, which suited their sort of time zone more so. So if you've got any questions, guys, please join in and ask. Today, I'll be faceting some really tiny facets on this amethyst, and I'm using a copper disc. So nothing has been done to this copper disc. A lot of times with copper, a lot of faceters like to anneal their discs and do all sorts of prep work, but this is basically a bonded copper lap. Nothing's been done to it and no alterations. So if you buy a lap that hasn't been prepped, it's just perfectly smooth. No reason why you can't polish on it. So I'm going to just do a few facets and hopefully all goes well. I expect this to go fairly fast, so I'll just get some paper organized. So I need to wipe the gem with. So now I've just did a little bit of a test on this facet and I'm using a 5 micron diamond paste, and make sure you got the right index, always important. Hey Tony, how you going? So I was just saying earlier on to some of the other people that arrived before you, Tony, there's 2 Tonys in on the chat session, but 10 and Tony Collins would know this is, but I'm faceting some of the small star facets in on the pavilion, and all I'm doing is using my copper disc, so not sure how this will go. So with this copper disc and this 5 micron paste, it is going really fast. So this is basically my pre-polish. and I'm just cutting with a pre-polishing diamond paste. And there'll be a lot of looking today. Cut a little and look a lot. It's actually pretty warm where I live. I live in central Victoria, which is a southern state of Australia. And gee, it was really hot. I actually got sunburnt. So the weather's all over the place lately. Okay, so that's going so fast that I've almost cut up to the girdle outline just then. So I've got to be really careful. So that one's done. So I'll move on to the next index and see how I go. With small facets, this is probably not the most ideal setting talking to people while I'm cutting. Oh yeah, you had a bandwidth dropout, Tony? I reckon the NBN in Australia will be at peak because so many people at home using it. Read a couple articles today in this Facet Talk, which is a magazine that actually one of the members of my faceting group sent me today. And I found some of the articles really interesting, reading about bat lap. I'm sorry, not the bat lap, the dark side lap. I had no idea that was a lap that you had to prep with diamond or cerium oxide. I thought it was like a lightning lap standalone. It was very interesting that in the article, they were doing almost opposite of what I do. And that is try to keep my discs contamination free. They were using both diamond and cerium on the same lap. Obviously, they were cleaning them, but that's something I'd be a little bit wary of. I know a lot of people do it. I guess if it's like a polishing of a, say, 50,000 diamond and you're using something equivalent, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But I found cerium to be a product that can actually scratch really easily on quartz. So this dark side lap, I don't know whether anyone owns one, but they say they are the bee's knees of some of the best polishing laps around. I'm very reluctant to even want to buy anything anymore like that, I have to admit. So those two facets are already pre, and I've got another 4 to do, and then I'll polish them. I have to admit this is going pretty quick. I mean, a lot of people would cut faster than I'm doing, but for me, I think it's going pretty fast. Get rid of that bit of toilet paper. I like to change out the toilet paper fairly regularly, so I'm not rubbing any contamination over my stone. Being amethyst, more so when you're faceting with cerium on a perspex lap, occasionally you can get a little chip come out of the stone and then it rolls underneath the facet while you're trying to polish it. And such a really bad feeling when that happens. You can actually hear it and you can hear the grinding sensation. And what will happen next after that, you end up with a big scratch that is almost impossible to remove with a polish. And then you've got to sort of pre-polish it out, which could lead to all sorts of issues like overcutting, Hey Al, how are you going from Creswick? Al, are you the guy who's got the Gem Master? Or have you got another machine? There's been a few Gem Masters up for sale lately. They've been selling fairly fast by the look of it, for around $3,000 to $3,500. That's for a second-hand machine. It's not bad, but you do get a lot of extras, a lot of polishing discs and grits and all sorts of things. Is it Al? You've got a Gem Master, haven't you? I do like the Gem Master machines. I have to admit, I wouldn't mind one, mainly because it would be very similar to this machine. It's got a mast. Not too sure about the swiveling faceting head that it has, but that's something I guess you'd get used to. I suspect that in another it'll take at least 6 months, but within 6 months to 12 months, I'd say the price of faceting machines, both new and second-hand, will have to come down in price. Not many people are going to have work to be able to afford them, unless there'll be a select few that have a bit of money. I think the other issue that we could, as faceters, struggle with is trying to buy some of these polishes and pastes and things, because most of them are imported. And I've been waiting for over a month to get some of this 5-micron paste, and it all comes out of China. So you might have the greatest faceting machine in the world, but if you haven't got enough diamond grit, life might become very difficult. See what happens. Most of the good quality diamond grit is at De Beers, which I like, and all that's imported. So it all depends whether it's hanging around the port for a month or two. Yeah, I saw a couple of those Gem Masters. I think it was on the Victorian Faceting site, Victorian Faceting Group site. A few photos. Both the same models. One was white and one was the traditional grey silvery colour. I wasn't sure whether the white one had been painted up or not. What do you reckon, Tony? Is that they come out like that model? Sort of with a white anodized paint on it? Oh, yeah, I thought they were both the same models with the photos, but one photo wasn't very clear. You could only see 3/4 of the machine. There's no doubt about the Gem Master machines. They are a very solid machine. I'm considering, because when my Gem Club opens up, I'm going to have a look at the quill, because I suspect the Gem Master quill might fit on my machine here. So I'm not sure, but got a feeling it may be a possibility. So I'm going to take in my quill and just compare it. The reason why I wouldn't mind a Gem Master quill is that I have a little grub screw here on the side. It's right on the side, and I reckon it pushes. I reckon it pushes my dop in to one side, so it creates a low point on this section where so underneath it usually ends up on index 24 on this 96 index wheel. So there's index 24 there, right here. So the grub screw's on the top. It pushes down onto the dop, which means the dop comes down a little bit as it pushes down, and that becomes the low point. And me and Tony Collins, we discussed that on the Victorian Facebook group site, and I think we've both come to the conclusion that having a grub screw, or just one grub screw, can push down the dop, although other people says no. But I think I've worked out why there is a low point. Now, that may be different on other machines, obviously, but on my machine, it's not, without a doubt, index 24 is the low point, and that's where that grub screw is located, pushing down the dop. I'm just being very careful with these facets. While I'm talking, I really do sort of need to concentrate. The only thing I did notice on the Gem Master at the Gem Club, I thought maybe the index wheel could be bigger. It hasn't got the biggest index wheel, so but you don't select the wrong index. This is one of the issues I have with my machine, I reckon. Index wheel is a bit on the tiny side. And I do think that's where Halls have got it really well worked out. Good size index wheel. In fact, a lot of the index wheels are pretty standard size. Usually they're about, I don't know, 50 millimeters in diameter. Really not too bad faceting at night. You get sort of, I don't mind the light, particularly for polishing at night. It seems to be a bit different looking at a facet at night. Then you can actually get a really good visual on the facet for some reason. When you've got reflective light coming from behind you and all that, it can affect how you see the facet. So, Al, what are you working on? What sort of stone are you cutting? Well, it seems that reading it, see, Toowoomba's in Queensland, obviously. Most of the machines seem to be up that way in Queensland, northern Queensland. That seems to be the hub of where all the facetors tend to reside. And clearly, Queensland is one of the more popular states in Australia for facetors to live because of the sapphire gem fields. Wouldn't mind going up there myself to have a look. But it is interesting when you see these machines on sale on Gumtree, with the restrictions imposed on travel, does make it hard for people to go over interstate and pick these machines up. I guess you just have to if you don't want it to be posted in the mail. So what's happening now? See, the diamond is a little bit more worn at the moment. So I'm starting to wear a bit thinner on the disc, so it's not cutting as fast, which is actually probably a good thing, because initially it was pretty aggressive. So I'm just reading some of these comments. And George L has been faceting quartz. So if you're new to faceting, it's interesting. I'm included. We all start by faceting quartz because it's a cheap option. But at the end of the day, it's one of the worst for beginner faceters to learn to polish on. So good luck with the polishing. I would suggest maybe if you have trouble polishing, then move on to a bit of topaz. You should find the polishing of topaz a lot better. Yes, I was reading that article about the Titan. Interesting comment on using methylated spirits to remove it. I just use paint stripper. Just stick it in paint stripper overnight, and the epoxy usually comes off. A lot of people would say use acetone on two-part epoxies, but no, I find acetone really, unless you want to wait a week or two, but it really doesn't do the job. It takes forever to remove quality epoxies. It might remove Tarzan's grip, something cheap and nasty, I don't know, but I would say on the quality two-part epoxies, it would be very hard for acetone to do the job it's supposed to. Works well on super glue though, acetone, no doubt about that. What, so you remove epoxy with acetone, Tony? Oh, I think it's too much of a struggle, to be honest. That's the other thing. When you get onto the final removal, don't be too impatient to remove the gem, particularly certain gems like fire opal or willow opal. You've got to be very careful removing heat-sensitive gems. Not only that, you can actually chip your culet on soft gem material. So, be a little bit careful when removing it, because you'll end up right on the last part of the gem, the final bit, removal on the, taking off the dopstick can be fatal, and spent probably a week or two faceting for most people, only to find you chipped the culet on removal, which is something happened once to me on fire opal. And so actually, it's not a nice feeling. Now I'm using this toilet paper, but I'm tossing it in a bin next to me, and I just get a new piece. Kind of what's happening at the moment, the diamond is not really doing what's supposed to, so I'm going to give it a bit of a clean and remove what I've got on there and just recharge it a bit. I'll just read some of these questions. Yes, I was just reading Dean's question about Stamthorpe topaz. There really is a lot of topaz in Australia. It's interesting that it seems that the topaz, well, most of the topaz I've had from O'Brien's Creek, a lot of it has little bits of rutile in it. It's not problematic, and sometimes looks really good. It's a nice feature, but sometimes when you get rutile and topaz, you've got to try to orientate it so that rutile looks, really good. It becomes a feature. Sometimes you can't. Fortunately, with the rutile and the quartz in Australia, it's very fine. So it's not like rutile and gold and quartz, that's for sure. It's a wax. I've used wax, got my faceting machine many years ago. A lot of my DOPs had that wax on it, and it was really hard and messy to remove. Other people using wax, and then they're removing it on, say, the first transfer, and then trying to reapply on the second transfer. It doesn't always go that well. Wax is pretty messy sort of a substance. I think if you're a beginner, you need to kind of watch what you're doing with the wax. I've never really used it. I mean, I don't. For me, it's pointless using it because I'm never in a rush, particularly on a transfer. Hey, Richard, how you going, mate? So where are you from, Richard? Are you from Europe or from the US? Because I've tried to actually make this video more exclusively for people who live in Europe because of the time difference. So I'm just going to recharge this copper lap. Look, for those of you who don't know, I'll just try to get it back. This is a THK 5 micron paste, pretty cheap. Hey, so from New Zealand, so probably a good time for you to be watching this from New Zealand. Not much of a time difference. So this is a 5 micron paste, and I use this for pre-polish on a copper lap, and it's actually cutting in very tiny facets. So these facets are no more than about 3 millimeters long, maybe 4 millimeters long, and about 1 millimeter in width. And I'm cutting down almost to the girdle outline, and it's doing a good job cutting, but also as a pre-polish. So basically, I don't apply too much, maybe 3 small, very tiny little spots on there, probably equivalent to a size of a match head altogether. And I'll just rub that in to the disc. It's funny, you watch a lot of people, their method of rubbing in some of these compounds. Sometimes they use old credit cards and all sorts of things. I've always used my finger, and the main thing is after I do rub it into the copper is to clean my fingers. But I don't see the point of using all this other stuff. So what I'll do now is just I've got a wet rag over here, and I'll just clean whatever's on there on my hands. Flip the rag over so it's on a clean part of the rag. Do it again. So all different ways of prepping discs. I was reading this few articles about that today in the Facet Talk, and by golly, to me it's like chasing a false god. The amount of annealing that people have to do, and some of the prep work just to get a disc up and running so they can polish it. The scouring, they have to scour it with, say, Stanley knife or a hacksaw blade, if it's perspex, and it's got to be in the right directions and all this stuff. And for the life of me, I can't sort of visualize myself ever doing that stuff. Most of my discs are smooth as a baby's butt. And look, I like to occasionally have, like my tin lap, I've only done it once, go down to the local engineer, and I specifically say just mill it as smooth as you can. The smoother, the better, as far as I'm concerned. But, there's so many different options, what people prefer. A lot of these things, I think, are just irrelevant. I don't know why it has to be that complex, fascinating. Hey, Richard. So you're an engineer, but you find that faceting is fascinating. Well, the thing is, actually, most engineers make really good faceting machines. I think that's some of the best faceting machines in this country were originally designed by engineers. Gee, I wouldn't mind learning how to become an engineer and then make my own faceting machine. Hey, Wayno's World from Gladstone, Queensland. Welcome. Let's have a cup of tea. Just to let those new viewers who've joined in, I'm cutting a piece of amethyst. Been working on this one for ages, called the Orbiter 10 by a well-known Victorian faceter who's an elderly gent called George Beard. And I actually read an article by George today on, actually I read a few articles out of that Facet Talk, but his was really interesting. He kept it all very simple, how he made his own little mixture of diamond, and reading how he polished is pretty much similar to what I do. It's not rocket science. It's sort of, if the original facet is cut at 45 degrees, he will start a little bit, higher up. He'll start up around 44.8 or something like that. So he's not working dead on the facet when polishing. Anyway, I kind of explained all this in previous episodes, and it goes into a bit of detail. So I'm actually, for those who don't know, I'm polishing on a copper disc, and nothing's been done to this disc. It's just a flat disc. It hasn't been annealed with corundum and all these things I use. It's just straight off what do they call it, the lathe, nice and smooth, and that's about it. So I just apply my 5-micron diamond paste, this stuff, to polish, and it does a great job as a pre-polish, not a polish. So I'm actually cutting tiny facets with this. Seems to work, and if it works, that's good enough for me. There's nothing very scientific about this method at all. Sorry to say, I wish I could make it more scientific, but I do like to keep it pretty simple for myself. If it works and does a good job, that's all I really care about. And you'll notice by a lot of my videos, that's what I kind of want for most of those people who are learning how to cut gems. You can get really bogged down. The thing about polishing, we all have slightly different methods. Each person is a little bit different. You're running at higher or lower machine speeds. The lap could be running anywhere from a couple hundred revolutions a minute to probably 1,000, depending on the person. Mine's sort of at a very moderate speed, and everyone does have their own little method. And if that works for you and it's consistently working well, then I'd probably stick to it. A lot of it has to do how application, also how much of the compounds you use. Some people use a little, some people use a lot, and some people use more pressure. Some people use hardly any pressure. I don't use a lot of pressure, so I'm just going fairly slow at the moment. But it's amazing how many different methods there are out there when it comes to polishing. And there's an unlimited amount of discs out there that are available to polish on also. The thing is, what I've noticed is that I saw some of the results from last year's Jamboree, and I do know that some of the people who won were polishing. Well, for example, a sapphire that was polished, I'll turn this off for a moment. There was a sapphire polished on a solid polishing lap. That got 99.6, 9.8 by Peter Craig. And then he came second on another material, I think it was quartz, and that got 99.4. So when you 50,000 compound mixed with a type of sunscreen, and if someone's getting such high scores on such a simple polishing lap and nothing very scientific, I would assume that some of the other high scores surrounding him, like Paul Sabota, he did really well. I'm kind of thinking these guys aren't using, all these high-end laps that you see around for hundreds of dollars. There's a lot of talk about this horse Rick the lap, but that's supposed to be a very good polishing lap. But see, it's what I've seen. Some of the simplest things are being, most basic and simple things are used to cut stones, and winning stones too. Pretty amazing. In fact, when I get I actually won a gold medal in a novice section, was 98.5, so it was pretty high too, actually, a good high score. It was a lot higher than I thought, and that was done on El Cheapo Chinese topper laps, and I polished it just on tin, that particular stone. So it was cubic zirconia. So it goes to show you can use the most basic materials to get a quality gem cut. And that's one of the things I've been trying to express to people who are learning. If when you buy your equipment, some people don't have all the discs at once, and you don't want to be forking out thousands of dollars because most people can't afford it. I certainly couldn't. So you just buy little bits at a time. So you buy, a good tin lap and then buy your topper laps. And so it should only cost you probably $150 or up, because you can buy a reasonable good tin lap for still around 100, and then the topper laps you can buy for around 30 to 35 now from overseas. So, and that will pretty much get you cutting a gem, those two laps. And that's not even, so your topper laps will come in range of from a 3,000 pre-polish all the way up to a 600. And that'll get most gems from 4 to 10 millimeters cut easily. So you don't need to even go out and buy 100 grit laps or 240s. So it's pretty basic stuff. So I'm just going to keep an eye. I'll do one more facet, and then I'm on to polishing. So facet 86. Sorry, index 86. Yeah, I've seen their beginner packs at Gem Cuts. Actually, it's not a bad, the same as I've got. They put their own labels on, just so maybe Gem Cuts won't like me saying that, but the reality is with these topper laps, they just rebadge them and put their own logo on it, and that's it. You can sell it for twice as much, if not more. Well, having a topper lap with a Chinese logo on it like that doesn't look that appealing, does it? Especially when you can't read what it says. Put your own little fancy label on it and call it Shazam, and you probably can double your money in overnight. Shazam polishing topper laps, which are originally $4 Chinese topper laps with a nice label on it. Yeah, but the starter packs are pretty good. Does that include a copper lap? Can't remember. So what I'm doing, I'm looking. It's a funny thing when you're looking with a loop, what I try to do, because I'm actually trying to work out how far I've got to go down to the girdle, and I'm checking out whether other facets are aligned okay. But with the loop, I've got about a couple mil, so I'm thinking, gee, I don't want to press too hard anymore. For anyone who wants to work with a copper lap and all the different grades of diamond, I'm just surprised how fast it actually cuts with pre-polishing. This 5-micron paste is probably cutting as fast as a 3000 pre-polished topper lap, which is impregnated with diamond. But this is very fast indeed. See you, Tony. Okay, see you, George. So what I'll do, I'll just do this one last facet. There's not a lot of people on board tonight. I kind of expected that because most of the people live in the US. But what I'll do, I'll finish this last facet and then polish them later on. I don't really want to be polishing these while I'm talking. The pre-polish is fine. But polishing, I've got to be a little bit careful. The smaller the facets, the more likely you'll overcut. No doubt about that. Oh, John's on board. How you going, John? For the benefit of John, who's just joined us from the USA, I'm cutting some very small facets on a copper lap. This is a copper bonded lap, the one you've seen in many of my videos recently. Using a 5-micron diamond paste, this one here. It's a blue paste, THK. You can get it on eBay. And I was just saying before you joined in how fast it is with pre-polishing and cutting small facets, equivalent to a 3000 diamond bonded topper lap. It goes pretty quick. Very surprising that it can go that quick, I have to admit, because when you feel the paste, it doesn't feel gritty or anything at all. It actually feels quite smooth. But it really does cut a very sharp facet and quickly, but also pre-polishes really well. So really the next step is just to go straight onto a final polish with the 50,000 diamond, which I wasn't going to do, but I might do it, I don't know. I just don't want to overcut with these small facets while I'm talking. Could happen. Okay, that'll do it. So look, I would probably cut those a lot quicker, but how long have I been yapping on? 45 minutes. So most of it's talking. So I've cut, you're not going to see it very well on this cheap webcam, but I'm basically cutting my star facets to the culette. Each one of these facets were about 4 to 5, maybe 5 millimeters in length, and it may be about 1 millimeter in girth. So they're not huge facets. They're pretty small. So that took no time at all, really. I could do it in half the time if I wasn't talking. So what we'll do, we'll make this a bit of a questions and answers session. I'll have a little break for a moment and sip on my cup of tea. I'm feeling pretty sunburnt at the moment. It's been pretty hot in Australia, particularly in Victoria. Really hot for this time of year. Usually it's a lot cooler. And because I'm at home, self-isolation like everyone, I've decided to catch up on all these gardening jobs and things around the house. So if anyone has any questions, it's not a lot of people on tonight. Just fire away, and maybe I can answer some of them. Or maybe you can, if you don't have any questions, maybe you can just type out a few things you've discovered in recent times with your faceting and things you've learned. Because there's a few things I want to be learning in the next week or two, trying out removing gems by different methods of heat, by boiling it off and stuff like that. So I want to try to see whether some people claim that removing these two-part epoxies works with methylated spirits. I'm doubtful about that. So methylated spirits, for those of you who don't know, is denatured alcohol. So soaking that a gem in denatured alcohol removes the epoxy. I'm dubious, I have to admit. I use paint stripper, which is the same components in the paint stripper in Australia is the same as a product in the US called Attack. The only difference is Attack is a lot thinner, where the paint stripper is a lot more viscous, which I actually like the viscosity of the paint stripper, because you can actually, when you drop your gem in it, it doesn't hit the bottom of the glass container, so you're not likely to chip it. It's really viscous, thick stuff. So you can just drop it in there, and it's like landing on a bed of feathers. Sometimes I've dropped a gem in, for example, like acetone. You drop the gem in, you can actually hear it clink as it hits the bottom of the glass beaker or the glass jar. So I've always wondered whether it would chip the gem. I don't know, but I wouldn't want to test it. So to answer Tony's question, Jawsy is out the back with mum. My wife is at home too. And today all Jaws did was sleep on a big pillow, his bed, under a table. The reason being is my son took him out for a run the other day, and he ran 10 kilometres along the bike, so he's a bit pooped out. Now this is interesting that Tony says putting gems with glue on it in the fridge. But I believe that only works just thinking of what it is, only works maybe on the super glue, but not so much that, but on the other stuff, the wax. Yeah, so I don't think it works. I really don't think putting a gem with this two-part epoxy is going to work by putting it in the freezer. So I'm just reading this. Attack is hard to work with, says John, because once you open the can seal, it will evaporate out of the closed can in about 2 days. Expensive. Now, this is, if you want to save some money, I could go to my shed and get it. I would say they'd have this in the US, but basic household paint stripper. And I believe I'm losing my connection. Hopefully, there's something going on with the internet connection. Might be a bit unstable. I'll just repeat that. So the actual components in Attack, I've got to look it up. They have the same. It's the same chemical composition as a commercial paint stripper. You got to paint it onto, the shingles or the boards where the paint's on. That will do the same job, and it's pretty cheap. So I didn't know that about Attack. I assumed it would be a little bit like acetone. If you didn't seal it off properly, it would probably just evaporate. I've had that happen with acetone. Actually, it was thanks to Tony Collins. He told me that he stored his acetone in some of those containers, like that house pills. So I use that type of plastic that doesn't seem to melt when acid is applied to it. But some of those pill dispensing containers are good. My son does a little bit of bodybuilding, so he gets these protein container full of protein powder, and I use those, and that really works well with the acetone. I've had them in. Well, I've got to show you, because I've had acetone in jars like this. I'll actually get it, and the acetone has just evaporated. So this has actually got the paint stripper in it, and it's really thick. So this is what I use to detach the glue from dots in the paint stripper. Yeah, I think I'm getting a pretty bad internet connection. Can everyone hear me okay? I don't know. Or is your quality? So I just got to is $18 a pint in the US. Oh yeah, but what about try the paint stripper? Like going to your hardware shop, just see what the price of a can of paint stripper is. Oh, thanks. So it sounds like Tony's dropping in and out, not me. Okay, see you, Richard. Richard, have a good time in New Zealand. Yep, so jam jars are not very good for putting in some of these chemicals. Okay, so things that I thought might work as removing gems, and I'm going to try this myself because I've got a test gem on a DOP. I have read that, this is from one of my subscribers, that you can actually boil the gem off slowly. So obviously you're not going to, if you've got a heat sensitive gem, you're not going to throw it into boiling water, but you put it in a old saucepan and just slowly boil the glue off. I don't know whether anyone's tried that. So that would be an interesting and a cheap way of removing a gem on the final transfer. So that would be an interesting scenario. So that's something I want to try out very soon. I might try that out tomorrow, see if it works, and I'll let you know whether it does work. Anything to avoid chemicals is a good option. Yeah, at one stage I tried very hard to buy a tack in Australia, but years ago you could buy it, but you can't get it anymore because of importation rules and regulations. It's a hazardous chemical, and so I guess ever since 9/11, there's been a lot of restrictions on postage from the US into Australia, like anything that could potentially blow up in a cargo hold on a plane. So a lot of things that you could buy years ago just you can't get available anymore, so of these laws. But it would have been good. One of the things I liked about Attack was, that it actually could pour out easily, where the paint stripper, because it's a bit gluggy. But anyway, we can't get Attack, so it's not an issue. So any questions? Because it looks like my connection is pretty unstable too. This will be peak time, I guess, in Australia for internet activity. So it's probably better off, I should do it in the morning. I had a couple things I did want to, I might have a look now. But there were a couple of things I did want to discuss, and I forgot what they were. Just one moment. Oh, yes, this is what I wanted to discuss. One of my subscribers was telling me that the new Gem Master may not possibly be released around June, July. The story is, and I heard the same story, that when Gem Cuts sort of bought the components from the Gem Master machine, that certain parts were missing. and that one of the parts happens to be the speed controller, and they like to build this machine according to the previous machine, the Gem Master 4. So I can't see this machine really being built for quite a while. So that's interesting. So we were talking the other week about the Dreamer machine. Now, this is something I've sort of mentioned it a bit on my Fascinating group site. Sort of never get a lot of response on this Facebook page, but anyway, I thought it was interesting that the results from the Taiwanese team in the US Faceting Guild competition. So this would be interesting for the American viewers. That what had happened, a team of Taiwanese faceters. So the head teacher, his name is Daniel Hu. He has a faceting workshop in Taiwan, and he's got a whole bunch of students, and they basically, from what I read from his Facebook page, is that they set out to win competitions. So they started with the US Faceting Guild competition. So there was a pre-master single stone entry. All his students went into that. I think single-handedly they all won from gold down to bronze. Daniel Hu, who is the teacher of this faceting workshop in Taiwan, he won the gold medal, 100-point stone. And I believe this has only happened 6 times in the history of the US Faceting Guild competitions. So it's a pretty rare occurrence. Also, these stones were cut on a machine which was a prototype back then. So they'd already made them, called the Dreamer. And they use these prototype machines also in the International Faceting competition, which is conducted by the Australian Faceting Guild. And so to get into these competitions for the international competition, you have to basically cut 3 stones. So anyone can enter, by the way. So I might even give it a shot one year. But so you cut 3 stones, and if those stones add up to a certain score that can beat all the other contestants from Australia, let's say, then you will be chosen in the top 5. That's how I kind of read into it. So I think they only pick about 5 or 6 guys, but I think 5 is the limit of people they'll choose from Australia. So the Taiwanese obviously were a team. They obviously cut at a very high standard. And so John's come back again. So you're missing a lot of the conversation. So you'll have to catch up later, John. So the Thais obviously got into the international faceting competition, and so did a few other nations, guys from the US. But the Taiwanese really, they outclassed everyone else. And really, they must be very good faceters for a start, because there were quite a few 100-point stones faceted, which is, I have to say, pretty rare. You don't see a lot of 100-point stones cut. Plenty in the 99 range, not 98, but 100-point stone is rare. And what makes it even more rare, one guy in the Taiwanese team cut 3 perfect gems, 300-point stones, and they were all done on this prototype Dreamer. Now, I know it's really interesting how this team, or the group of people headed by Daniel Hu and his students, they really worked out a system rather than work as individuals like we would in Australia and just enter our stones. They actually planned to win these competitions, and that really it's food for thought that even in Australia, if we're going to regain this title collectively, we almost have to work a team. Now, I would think that it's almost a guarantee that these stones weren't one-off stones. So for them to win this competition, they would have picked a selection of their best stones. So, for example, the Taiwanese team probably would have cut 2, 3, 4 stones, chose the best stone to enter into the international faceting competition, which is something I don't do. All my stones I've entered into a competition have been one-off cuts, mainly because I believe a really good gem cutter, you shouldn't have to cut 2 or 3 stones for competition. You know, if you're not good enough to cut the first one up to a high standard or reasonable standard, then, you know, really, you know, whatever reason, if you can't do it once off, then you're probably not a good gem cutter anyway. If you have to cut 4 or 5 stones, and I know this happens a lot, and pick the best, well, you're not going to, it's not the way I think should be done. So if you can hit the target as close as you can, first time and every time, that's probably what makes a really good faceter, you know, limiting your mistakes. So, but credit to the Taiwanese team, they did a great job of taking out this competition. From my perspective, I don't think it could be a lot of fun. Really, if you've got to work at it for many months as a team, choosing perfect gems for competition, really, I don't think that could be much fun. But the Chinese they dedicate themselves like this, and they do work well using this type of method. So any comments about international faceting competitions or competitions in general? Some of you people out there must, I know Tony has. Look, yeah, and look, I'm reading Tony's comment. They would have critiqued every stone. And that's what I'm trying to say. There's no doubt about it that they would have. And I have to admit that in the Jamboree, reading Facet Talk, you could see all the winners. Those people who won, most of them are faceting judges. Paul Sabota, Peter Craig, all of them are faceting judges. I'm not a faceting judge. So they are really behind the 8 ball in winning Australian competitions. And they know exactly what to look for in terms of mistakes. They know exactly what a judge is looking for also. So if you're a judge cutting in a competition, you really do have it made. It's almost worth, if you're interested in competitions, to do a judging course, but you have to be able to, you know, be fairly good already and have entered and got up to a high standard. So John's, yeah, I facet for the fun. Look, I submitted 3 stones in the last competition in the Jamboree. Most of them I knocked off. I did within a bit over a week with the dog next to me, yapping away and me filming at the same time. And it was a real lot of fun making the video and then just submitting the stones. I didn't expect really to win, but I did win in one section. But I think that is the key to being a very, you know, to faceting. Just enjoy it. I sometimes think some of these competitions are a little bit on the serious side, so they can be taken out of context. With the Dreamer machine, Tony, I worked out what the price would be, and so did another subscriber. And basically, for that machine to be bought in Australia, you're looking at 15,000 AU. That's by the time you take into consideration import duties, other costs. You've got to say to yourself, is it worth spending $15,000 on a machine for a competition that's only ever going to cut quartz and cubic zirconia? That's it. It's not like you're cutting diamonds every day or sapphires. So that's an interesting sort of price, isn't it? 15,000. I know I won't be spending that. That's for sure. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed in the US with Ultratech. They have clearly taken a option to build the VL machine because it's a darn sight cheaper than their upper level machine, which is I think is around 10,000 US. So when they've virtually knocked off nearly $6,500 off the price. Is that right, John? About 6 to 6.5 US off the price. Well, that's an astronomical amount of money to take off, to take, in savings, to take that much off the price. And from what I've read, that it's just as accurate. So that's a bonus for a lot of facetors. What worries me about some of these high-end machines, particularly the Dreamer, maybe Daniel Hughes watching this, but he's not going to like what I say. My opinion is that it just doesn't look robust enough for us Aussie guys. Like, I do a fair bit of faceting, and this is a machine I don't think I could get 2 years out of it, particularly when you start faceting larger gems, and the minute you start faceting 2 or 3 hours a day, like a lot of facetors do. I'm not sure whether such a machine could handle that type of intensity. It really does look like a machine that's highly accurate, but it's been specifically built to win competitions. It's a very delicate looking machine. So not only that, I think each disc they sell with that machine costs $200 US. So by the look of it, you need 3 to 4 discs. So it's another $1,000 US on top of the machine. And by the look of those discs, they are well-made discs. So it's probably given them a bit of edge on accuracy. So, John, you have a VL machine, and how are you finding that? It's, by the look of some of your gems, looks like that's doing a wonderful job. So 5,000. So it sounds like the top end machine from the Ultratech is around 10 grand US, 10,000 US. So it's about a $5,000 saving. Is that true? Just put a Y or N, yes or no. Because if even then, that's a huge saving even in US dollars. And so from what John said, it's got the same size quill. It doesn't have that L-shape adapter that you hold on to, which in my opinion, this is what's been discussed at my gem club. That's actually a design flaw of that little handle they do put on the Ultratech, because Australians are very big on holding the gem. Holding the gem gives you a lot of benefits, in my opinion. You get a good feel of what's going on from between the gem and the disc. And you're not putting any downward pressure. Well, but you're not trying to put too much downward pressure. You're just using, well, in my case, I just use the weight of my quill as downward pressure. And the last thing I want is too much hand pressure at times. But credit to Ultratech for thinking about producing a cheaper machine, because I think a lot of these companies, and particularly in Australia, once you get over 5,000 AU in Australia, because our wages are pretty low here, I'd say that's almost the limit that the majority of people can afford. And in my opinion, I reckon 3.5 to 4 is a limit on a brand new machine in Australia. Oh yeah, so that's good. So 10K for the Ultratech is actually a scintillator. The V5's around 6. So the V5s are a well-known machine, aren't they? So I think really with the VL, what would be a good test cut on that for accuracy would have to be Jeff Graham's Utopia, or I think the Cleopatra's Eye would also be a good one. Utopia is definitely an easier cut. So I would, to really test out a machine in terms of accuracy, and that all depends on the person themselves, how good a gem cutter they are, but I would think that the Utopia, unfortunately, the original design is not quite right. So you're going to struggle with a few of those corner facets leading into the QLED. Unfortunately, that's going to be not a good design. I would probably do the Cleopatra's Eye, the one I sent out to you, John. That'll really test it out. But most of Jeff Graham's designs, the money cut designs, will be a good test on it if you want to find out how accurate it is. Another product I'll be using, I'll show you this now while I'm here. I haven't bought it yet, but I will be trying it. And one of my subscribers said, with the WD-40, there is a lanolin variety. So it's nowhere near as chemically as this variety here. So apparently you can get that in a hardware shop in Bunnings. So WD-40 lanolin, and it's supposed to do a really good job of cleaning your discs. One of the problems I have with this product is that indoors it's a little bit toxic in terms of smell. And I have found that if you don't dispatch of your tissues after cleaning discs properly within plastic bags, that the odors end up making me wheeze and cough. So this is a really nasty product indoors. Do need to be very careful with WD-40 cleaning discs. I know people use methylated spirits or denatured alcohol on their tin laps, and I really don't find it does a good job. I find WD-40 is one of the few cleaning agents to clean off that black swarf, but you get that build-up you get on polishing discs, and even on copper, on these copper laps. Eventually they go black. I'm going to clean it now. But the problem with this WD-40 is that it stinks the room out, and you just got to be careful. I won't be doing any more polishing. These are very fine facets, and I don't really want to be overcutting these facets. But yeah, this WD-40 has to be dealt with correctly. I've got a plastic bag in my bin, so it'll go into that. But so you get all that black stuff that it takes off. I think Tony mentions that he uses Windex, a glass cleaning product. I haven't really found that to be that successful, to be honest. Yeah, now that's an interesting little topic with Haven. It's very good gem design, and not one of my favorites, I have to admit. I do like Jeff Graham, and I do like some of Bob Keller's designs, but I know that Haven, or is that how you pronounce it? I do know that he says you can cut facets and polish them on the Ultratech at 1/10 degree intervals. I would think the way he's doing that is that he's polishing them in those to all those facets. I did see something on YouTube where you can virtually go around the pavilion and all 1/10 facets, and only the Ultratech can do that. But there is no way known he's using, a 1200 or a 600 topper lap. He's got to be using some sort of pre-polishing laps, maybe on copper or on tin, and doing it that way. Because really, when you're cutting at such small, I don't know how to, such small facets, with really just the difference between a 3000 and a 1200 topper lap would be, just one little swipe would be almost 1/10 of a degree you're cutting down, and that's on those fine pre-polish laps. The tolerances he's talking about that machine can cut at, I find that very hard to believe. The only way I can think you can cut those type of facets, so you're doing 100 facets around the pavilion at 1/10 degrees, you'd have to be polishing those facets you wouldn't be using topper laps or diamond bonded laps. It has to be all done with pre-polishing laps, probably on copper, using maybe what I'm using at the moment, this stuff, because there's no way, anyone can cut with those type of tolerances. That's ridiculous. Well, that's right. That's what Tony's saying. They're like ghost facets. He's faceting. What he's failing to mention, I think, is that he's not using a conventional disc. He's actually just polishing those facets. So I think maybe a lot of machines can do that, to be honest. I don't see the point, because I've done it myself where you actually think at the more facets you have on the pavilion. So, and I've done it, I've cut at one stage over 32. Yeah, 32 I cut on a pavilion, thinking that would give a lot more output. But in point of fact, the more facets you have on a pavilion tends to give you a lot less output. It does the opposite. And not only that, you can't see the facets. It looks like a totally polished surface when you're cutting so many of those fine facets. I kind of think it's not worth doing. But I think to prove a point, they had to prove a point that Ultratech could do it. But he's definitely using polishing and pre-polishing discs to do it. Anyway, I'm going to finish up soon. If anyone's got any questions, I had a pretty long day gardening, and I haven't been doing a lot of faceting because most days I'm pretty pooped. I get up around about 6:30, 7, start working in the garden around 8 o'clock and do that for 5-6 hours. And, I'm pretty tired. I'll probably win Australian Garden of the Year the way I'm going at the moment, because there's a lot of work being done. So, John, are you still there? I was just going to say, if John's still about, have you found, is there anything about the VL machine that could be improved in terms of like the accuracy or the length of the quill, things like that? Has it got enough torque in the engine? Hi, Stephen. You have come in late because I'm going to be heading off, but you can always watch this video like later on. So does it? So what are the major issues with the VL that could be a bit better? I always thought the quill looked a bit too short. No, I haven't got a huge hand. This is just an average medium-sized hand. But that to me has always looked like that could be lengthened. It looks like a great machine. I wouldn't say no to an Ultratech, that's for sure. If Ultratech are listening and you want to send me a machine all the way from the US to test out for a year or two, be my guest. I'll see how it goes. So what's the torque like on the Ultratech, John? The motor, I don't know whether you cut a big gem yet, but say if you're cutting a bigger gem of say 15 millimeters, how's that handling it? Well, it might be a smaller motor, might be a different size motor, I don't know. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, so it doesn't really bother you the length of the quill. Does it have a reverse? One that would have reverse on it. Can you put it into reverse? That's something I've noticed on the Gem Master, that it doesn't have a reverse anymore. Probably don't need it anyway, really, but if you had an option, it's probably good. Yeah, look, it's funny, Stephen. I'm doing less faceting now. I'm home more because I've decided just to do a lot of gardening. Oh, good. So that's good. So it's got plenty of torque. I was reading an article that someone needed to replace a motor in their VJ, which is a very good. That's so it's got the reverse. So yeah, I reckon you would use a reverse occasionally. I mean, I don't. I just put the dop the other way, this way on this side, because that becomes reverse anyway. But the VJ machine motors. There was an article I was reading, and they wanted to know what type of replacement 90-volt motor. And I think a lot of machines take these smaller Chinese 90-volt type of motors, but apparently they don't cost a lot, but they don't have the torque required to cut larger gems. So I found that really interesting with replacement cheap motors that are going around. It's clearly that you need a quality motor. I'm going to head off, guys, girls. I don't think it's mainly guys tonight. I said it wouldn't be as long a session. I was just going to cut in. I just cut in a few facets for those people dropped in. They were just some star facets, and I just did I use a pre-polish to cut them in, but I'm not willing to polish them while I'm doing this streaming online, only because they're very small and really wouldn't take much to overcut beyond the girdle outline. So what I'll do, I'm going to head off. Thank you for those who have joined in. As I said earlier, I did choose a different time, mainly for the benefit of those people who lived in Europe, but I think we had a few people who did drop in from Europe. Tony Wild, I think, comes from Europe, from England. So that was good, and just gives other people the chance to have a bit of a look and listen. So before I head off, I'll just read a few more of these questions. Oh, that's good. So it's direct drive. Okay, so it's a direct drive type of assembly. Uses a rubber cone drive. Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, thanks, John. And thank you to everyone else who've joined in tonight. I'm glad that some of you guys actually got the chance to join. I know Tony Collins has missed a few of them. So hopefully I can move on to another gem. This one's taken me forever. I really want to get onto another gem. So I really should get stuck into this and, I don't know, get this pavilion done, do a quick transfer and get stuck into the crown. I'm just wasting so much time trying to get this thing done. Actually, not an easy design, this Orbiter 10. The crown will definitely be less facets, but it will be a tricky one to get done. What is really interesting with George Beard's designs, that's totally different than most gems, is when you get to faceting the crown, you usually cut the table before you cut in the corner facets. So that's something I've never come across in any other design. Usually you cut the table last, and then that table, meets whatever facets, star facets or corner facets. But George Beard, he certainly does this with all of his gems, forces you to cut the table second last before you cut in the corner facets to meet the table corner facets. Which means the only way I've got to pretty much polish in sequence, polish the first set of crown facets, and then just go through the second set, all to a final polish. Crazy stuff. Oh, so you have a 64 index gear. It was interesting, before I finish up, that design I sent you the other day on the 64 was Tutankhamun's eye. It's funny, I always thought you could transpose a 64 gear to a 96 or vice versa. But when I looked at the conversion on GemCut Studio, you just couldn't do it. So it was really, I found odd. I thought or really, in most cases, you don't need to get a 64, but obviously there are certain cases where you do need to. But the other thing, what will be really good also with the 64 index wheel, and I've spoken about this on several other live streams, is that the 64 index, if you know how to convert, back from a 96 to a 64 on your basic designs like a standard round brilliant, which is really easy to do, then the less teeth you have in the wheel, the better off you are, because less mistakes occur. This wheel here's got that many notches in the index wheel. So easy to make a mistake, pick a wrong index, whereas on the 64, the notches or the teeth are spread out quite a bit further. I always think, the further those teeth are spread out, the better you are in picking the right index. That's right. I think, yeah, what you're going to have to do with that design, John, with the Tutankhamun's eye, I haven't tested it. See, I hate, like, most of the designs I test, but this gem I've got it here at the moment. It's taken me forever. I would have had it done by now, but Tutankhamun's eye. I think it's going to work out fine, but you're going to have to float in some of the facets. There's no doubt about that, particularly on the C2 facets. But it's a lot less. There are a lot less facets to be cut compared to Cleopatra's eye. Oh, yeah. What? So you reckon you can convert the Tutankhamun's eye to a 96? I'd like. How are you going to do? Oh, it'd be interesting if you could. Actually, you mentioned something last night, Tony, about my latest design, which actually named by Tam, another subscriber. It's called the Eye of Horus. But you did mention that the eye facet didn't quite meet up to some of those corner facets, and you actually were right. I left a kind of a bit so they didn't quite meet, because I thought initially I liked the width of those corner facets. For me, a lot of the times, I know because Jeff Graham, he likes to keep his table smaller. I always find with a deeper pavilion, smaller table, you get better output in scintillation. Small tables, I reckon, are great in many cases. So I didn't want to make the eye as big, but then when you mentioned it, I looked at the design and thought, look, I did make it meet properly, so I got the meet points of the eye, but I decided also to adjust the pavilion facets so that it would work better on lower RI gems. Yeah, look, I'd be using the 64 index, John, to be honest. You're going to find the 64 index, eventually you'll be using it a lot on standard round brilliants and a lot of squares, and all your step cuts you do, so your rectangular steps, your square step cuts. There is no way I would use my 96. There's no way. It's just so much better. I actually find it's a little bit more accurate too with the 64. I don't know why. I do have another one. I think it's actually 60 index wheel. So I guess that would work with squares. But 64 is fine. I have heard that some facetors only have dedicated wheels, because certain facetors only ever facets a standard round brilliant. So that's his favorite. So that's all he does, mainly on sapphires and that. So you'd have a dedicated 96 teeth or even 64 teeth. Those of you probably, if you've noticed, I color coded, because I had to get one made up myself. So I actually color coded the indexes that you quite often use the most. So red and blue and black. And that's one of the things about index wheels. I wish all companies would do that, color code their index wheels. but you can color code them yourself. You just get a little bit of enamel paint, or you can get a little bit of paint from nail polish paint, something that will adhere. And it's really good if you can color code your index wheels. I've seen this, I think, on the VJ, they color code their index wheels, and it's a really good thing they've done. Anyway, guys, I'm going to head off, and let me know, John, how you go with Tutankhamun's eye. Please don't say you can't facet it. So I'd love to see that. I should almost do that after I finish this gem, Tutankhamun's eye, because I think that'll be a really stunning gem if you can get it right. Yeah. Yeah, look, there's so many. This is one of the things in my previous live stream, I was talking about the fact that when it comes to faceting machines, really, there's so many things that need to be fixed up on faceting machines. Is like, this is another example, just a simple thing on index wheels. Color code them, color code, some of the indexes. But just little, just small things make the quill a bit longer. And it seems to me a lot of these faceting machines haven't been thought out. And I think the reason being is they've never spoken to a group of faceters and said, okay, guys, what can we really do to make this a great faceting machine? Because all faceting machines have flaws. Mine has flaws. There are things on this machine I do not like at all. And yet there are other things I really love. So at some point, you'd think there'll be a manufacturer that kind of gets everything right, but I don't think it's happened yet. I think my protractor's way too small. I'd love to see slightly bigger protractor head. But then on the flip side, when you see, for example, the VJ, the damn protractor takes up half your machine, and that's almost too big. So just little things. This could be a bit bigger, make it easier to see the settings on the protractor. Quill length is pretty good. Little things. This grub screw, I reckon, is a fault. A lot of machines have got grub screws that hold in tops. Whereas if you had, say, a chuck type of assembly at the tip, where you mount your dop in, lots of things can be changed. And there's so many things. I'm not convinced either. See, a lot of machines, I didn't even know that till recently, because I always thought when you turn clockwise, that's lowering the faceting head. And a lot of machines, I know the Halls, you have to turn anti-clockwise, yet on some of the early model Gem Masters, where they've got the dial, you turn clockwise to lower. And when I first learnt years ago was on a Dravish machine, and the thing that used to annoy me the most of all about that machine was the fact that you had to turn anti-clockwise to lift the faceting head up, because everything in life is when you're turning clockwise, something's always coming down, never going up. So when I turn this assembly here, I'm turning clockwise, so it's lowering the assembly. And for the life of me, I wish they would, I wish they'd get it right. Ultratech on theirs counterclockwise. So I reckon that's a flaw within the machine, personally. I actually think that's a design flaw, because I know the early Gem Masters, it's all clockwise. And when I used one at the Gem Club, I was just trying it out, going, gee, this would be such an easy machine. But then you find they changed it with some of their newer models. They put the vernier on top, and it's all anti-clockwise. So figure that out, why they would do that. I think other issues which could be dealt with is, sometimes I wish this was not 150 mil. I wish it was a bigger plate like the Facetron. I think you probably get a lot more mileage out of a disc, particularly with topper laps. That might be something. And I don't. Maybe I can get a bigger size master lap on this too. I don't know whether I could. Maybe the pan's not big enough. I'm not sure. see this design flaw in this, I think, is that this pan is made out of aluminium, so you can actually chip a gem when you hit that. It doesn't have any rubber on it, or so I could put a bit of hosing around it, I guess. In my opinion, that's another design flaw, where when you see the Facetrons and the Ultratechs, they've got that nice rubber pan. So that's a good design feature. Oh, so I can buy it 8-inch, yeah. But I have to buy a proper mark. You get a lot more mileage out of the 8-inch compared to the 6-inch. I don't know what the VL is. I have no idea. Is it Ultratech a 6 or 8-inch? Probably 6-inch, I'd imagine. I'm not sure. So they finally, they sent you the rubber pan. Oh, that's a good. Well, you've done well, because those rubber pans are. I reckon that's a great feature. I wouldn't mind one of mine. There's no way I can do that. Just to remove this pan, I'd be looking at all sorts of issues. Oh, so it's an 8-inch. Oh, that's great. See, I kind of think a lot of Aussie machines, I reckon they're a bit on the small size, but if it's a cost issue, yeah. Oh, the VJ are 8-inch too. The only thing I have noticed, the price difference in discs. There's a huge difference between a 6-inch and an 8-inch. So from an affordability point of view, if you go through a lot of topper laps and discs and things like that, the 8-inch is way more expensive. Well, look, that's one of the good things I've noticed about the Ultratech. It seems like their VL machine, a lot of the parts are interchangeable. If you want to upgrade from that upgraded model that you mentioned earlier on, but what V5 I think it's called. So they've thought things out. But by the time you upgrade all these components, you may as well buy that V5 model. Okay, so you're using the 6-inch toppers. So how have you been finding those, John? Look, I've been using them for a long time now. I've been using 100 grit and 240 for nearly 4 years to do all like preforming and stuff on. So they're not too bad. The only thing you do need to be careful with is usually it happens on the 3000. Everything is going really great, and like any topper lap, you keep using them, because a 3000 virtually becomes an 8000 pre-polish type of lap, because as they become worn. But one day those 1200s, and particularly the 3000 topper lap, a little piece will just fall out, and you'll hit the base plate, and it's not like it wears down to the base plate slowly by surely, just a little fleck will drop out. And when you're polishing and you hit that little fleck, that seems to, I don't know where it goes to, but it ends up just getting washed down with the water. It ends up chipping a gem. Once you get down to base plate metal, it starts chipping. It hits that little indentation where the actual diamond has come off, and just got to be really careful. I think at some stage when you think your 3000 is getting pretty worn, then you toss it, and then you just break in a new one. But it's never happened on a 600 or an 800. Yeah, look, those Chinese topper laps, and I mentioned early on, most companies rebadge them. They take the sticker off, stick their own sticker on, whatever it may be, for whatever company, and then they sell them for usually about 4 times the price. They're just cheap Chinese topper laps. I'll try to find an article one day. There was a guy who worked at the Crystallite factory, and he compared the Chinese topper laps with the more expensive laps, and he thought the Chinese ones were better. It had far more diamond on them. So if I find that article, I wrote down the link somewhere, and I'll send it out to you. Really interesting article about these Chinese topper laps that he thought, and this is an ex-worker from a prestigious company. He actually thought the Chinese laps were better. They work for me. I don't intend spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on laps. I've got some really nice expensive laps behind me. I'll show them to you one day. One was specially made in Melbourne, and I wore that out literally within a month. That was a 240 solid lap. Wore it out in no time at all. Then I bought a Chinese topper lap 240, and I've had it for nearly 4 years. Still goes okay. Yeah, I saw that with the racks behind. Just reading a few of these questions. Yeah, that replated diamond is exactly the ones I had initially that came from Melbourne years ago. Mine was brand new and didn't last hardly any time at all. I've got a really nice crystallite lap, 1200, and I'm thinking, do I really want to use it? I should use it one day, but I get a feeling it's not going to last that long. Not only that, it's one of those solid laps, and it's because it's 1200, and then I've got it changed down to a 3000, different thickness. It's not worth my time. It's every time you've got to lower this masthead down, every time you change your lap or lift it up. That's one of the things I like about these topper laps. They're all the same thickness. You use your 600, boom, you swap it out for a 1200, same thickness. You don't have to mess around with height adjustments, straight onto your 3000 if you want. Where so many of these laps are all different. They're all different thicknesses, and you've got to lift the mast up and down like a yo-yo, something I don't want to be doing too often. Well, guys, I'm going to head off. Have a good night, Tony, and have a nice morning breakfast. I think it's, what time's in the US? It has to be early morning sometime. 6 in the morning, I'd say. So you must be an early riser, John. Is anyone getting sick of this self-isolation before I head off? Because I've had enough of this nonsense. Oh, yeah, so it's early morning, US. Oh, 4. You're up early, John. Jeez. So Ariel says 6:46. I assume he's he'd have to be on the West Coast, somewhere in California, wouldn't he? No, all my topper laps are just loose. They're not magnetic. Never used magnetic laps, I have to admit. Okay, just looking at some of the time zone differences. You get out of bed every morning at 3 a.m. Jeez. No, that's something I can't do. 3 a.m. is a little bit early for me. I think if I got up at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'd be in bed about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, I'm looking at some of the things that goes on in the US. You guys have got a heck of a job dealing with that virus. It's just amazing. from what I can tell in Australia, at the rate we're going, look, knock on wood, but I can't really see this virus being around for any more than another 2 or 3 weeks. Because some of the states in Australia now, it's there's no episodes, no occurrences. They can't find anyone who's got it. So unless it lingers around for another few weeks, but at the rate we're going, I think we'll probably have got rid of it. Because I think because we're a vast country, some of the things they've done, it's just pretty. Some of the rules and regulations, it's like living in a communist country at the moment. It's people getting fined for putting flowers on a grave site because you've got to be self-isolated. You're not supposed to be visiting anywhere except a supermarket by the look of it. So people getting ridiculous fines of $1,000. Can't go fishing by yourself, can't go hunting by yourself, really. You're allowed to exercise, so you're allowed to go for a walk around the park. But I've got to tell you, I'm pretty much over this myself. It's just kind of silly. Yeah, look, I think, Tony, it'll be a month, but to be honest, I think if it goes at the rate, with the infection rate at the moment, I can't really see that it's going to be beyond a month, to be honest. That's if people are doing the right thing. But you only need one, group of silly people, and then you've got an outbreak again. It's just the way it's going to be. I guess it just depends where you live in the US too. A lot of places are quite remote. I'd imagine many places in the US where it's just less people living, you'd have to be unaffected. But from my point of view, look, I'm not used to being at home, constantly, I'm not used to being told that, you can't go out and have a meal in a restaurant. There's all this stuff. Hey, that's funny you should say that, Tony, because that's been the benefit. It's been no in-laws. I've had no people knocking on the doors, trying to sell me stuff. So that's been good too. It's been pretty quiet, but it is a little bit funny in Australia because when you go to shopping centres, the biggest shopping centre I go to is about 25 kilometres away. It's a city called Shepparton, and I grew up in Shepparton. Now I live in a rural town. It's only 200 people, and it's quite picturesque and it's quiet. But when I go back to Shepparton to do my shopping, it's like going back 30, almost 40 years in time. The traffic is virtually non-existent. There's only a few people walking around. And it's actually quite refreshing to see, the lack of activity, because it reminds me of what Australia was like 40 years ago. Well, someone asked me what my profession is. I teach music in schools, but I'm not paid by the Department of Education. I'm paid by the parents, and all the schools are closed. And I'm in an unfortunate position, like many people. That I'm out of work at the moment. That's life. So currently doing a lot of gardening. So, and that's the unfortunate thing, I think, at the moment. People like myself, because I don't employ people, I'm self-employed. There's not a lot going on for people who are self-employed in this country. So if you've got a small business that you work from home, you basically got to apply for what's known as unemployment benefits. And from that is probably not an easy thing to do because it's all asset tested and things like that too now. So actually, I think in some ways, the luckier people are those who are already unemployed, because they don't have to do anything except just receive the benefits, and they have to make no applications. But I'm doing okay. Look, I don't want it to go on for 6 months, But I think, a couple months you could, put up with, 2 or 3 months. But it's pretty, when you see that many people just losing their jobs overnight. And in some way, like, this is not talking about gems, so I'll finish soon. But in some ways, it's really pretty amazing to think that, the whole economy of a country can just spin over so quickly. Even if some people are out of work for 3 or 4 weeks or a month or two, it's hard to imagine that things just don't reset the moment this virus is gone. So that I can't understand. I cannot understand where we're borrowing all this money from. I have no idea, God. I really cannot understand where the Australian government are borrowing money from, obviously from a World Bank, but there is no limit to the amount of funding going on. And that all has to be paid back by the taxpayer. But it just seems to be limitless money being spent. And there comes a day to pay the piper. But, if it's that easy to access money, why didn't they do it 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Just, borrow $1 billion here or there. But all of a sudden they've got more money than they can poke a stick at. And every day there's more billions being borrowed. I don't understand it. And I think that's the same in the US. There's money, and in Europe, there's money flowing from, world banks everywhere. I don't get it. Yeah, look, if those people, well, see, actually, for those people who live overseas, for the benefit, these are things I've never heard of in my life. But if, say, you're a landlord, for the next 6 months, all payments on houses are suspended. So if you can't afford to pay your rent, then you need to contact your landlord and say, "Hey, I can't afford to pay my rent," and you've got to negotiate. And clearly, the banks are being told that they have to stop all payments. So those people got mortgages. Well, they're going to have to stop payments for a certain amount of time. And this is all done with a drop of a hat. Or there are laws being changed that usually take years to change. They change them within a couple of hours. Like, literally, they're changing laws within 24 hours and they become law. I've never seen anything like this. And I think currently there's about 63 or 64 people who've died of this virus in Australia. More people have died in this time, bumping into a car or something. Or, stubbed their toe on the road and fell over and cracked their head open. More people would die that way, but whatever's going on, it's just beyond my imagination. I just don't understand what's happening. And, finally, the thing that bothers me the most is that the Chinese Communist Party are responsible for this outbreak because they were so slow to report it to the World Health Organization. Because this outbreak started in mid-November, and then in mid-December, they already knew that the virus could be passed on from person to person, and yet nothing was done about it, wasn't reported properly. And no one in Australia, none of the politicians are willing to take the Chinese Communist Party on and take them they have to make them accountable for what's happened in the world. I don't get it. I just don't understand why no one is pressing China for the world's problems. Just doesn't. They're all tight-lipped at the moment, and they're still not 100% sure of the source of this virus. They're still talking about whether it came from a wet market, a fish market, or whether it came from a lab. And, something we're not being told. The whole thing doesn't seem right. I was reading today in the US that quite a few people had received $1,200, and I don't know like a lot of people were really happy to get it. So, gee, I wish they gave me $1,200, the government. So I don't know how that worked out. But clearly the US is the same as Australia. Money is being, ever. And it just hopefully when it's all over and done with, we can just all go back to living our lives as normal. Would be good, I can tell you that. So finishing up on fastening, we've talked about the coronavirus, as most people seem to these days. I'm hoping the price of the US dollar becomes more imperative to the Australian dollar, because a lot of the gems I've bought in the past, and I've noticed that a lot of good online gems do come out of the US. So I'm hoping that things might change up a little bit in the future in terms of prices of gems. At the moment, the Aussie dollar is not faring too well. So if you're living in the US, you definitely have it in terms of gem quality, and the Tucson Gems Show. Things are going pretty good for you guys with the quality, I've noticed. Finding a lot of the gem quality in Australia, not too crash hot. Few of the gem shows has been okay, but what I've seen online in Australia hasn't been very good. But I do have enough to keep me going for quite a while. But I have noticed that in the US, the quality of your gems is just so much better. You have a lot to choose from. Hi, Tam. I'm about to head off. So thank you, Tam, for giving me the title of that new gem, Eye of Horus. I mentioned something about that in the community tab, and someone said, "Oh, I've already seen. I've got that design." That person said, "I don't believe it," because I thought, gee, maybe I better look this up. Maybe there is another Eye of Horus, but obviously I couldn't find it. But I have never seen a square gem with an eye shape in it anyway. So that was my intention, to design something that was a different shape rather than an elliptical type of shape. Yes, so I hope you're feeling better, Tam, getting over whatever you had. Yeah, I was looking for an Egyptian theme. I was thinking certain things, Eye of Ramsey, Tutankhamun's eye already used up, so Cleopatra's eye. Someone said on the Victorian Fasting Group forum, call it Cleopatra's eye. Clearly, they haven't been reading any of the posts on there, so I left it. But yeah, look, I think that's a good name, the Eye of Horus, and yeah. Well, when I did call it the square eye, because that's initially when I was designing it. You got to write in a bit of a description in GemCut Studio, so I just wrote down square eye. But I thought, no, I won't do that. I wanted to keep it with the Egyptian theme. So, and I was thinking, well, let's see if I can. I've done it with a round shape where I've created an eye within a round by using frosting, and then I thought I'd do a square design because it hasn't been done before. The Tutankhamun's eye is definitely a bit of a spin-off from the Cleopatra's eye. So the whole thing, I did want to do it on a different index wheel, but a lot less facets. And I did send Tam out an easier version of the Cleopatra's eye, which you can do. You have to do it on 64 index wheel. That should be a good one to do. That's just cutting. You haven't got all those C8 facets. It's really just cutting one row of crown facets, 2 rows, I think, and then you'll cut around center eye. But I have noticed there's a similar design on YouTube, but every time it ends up oval, but it's got a lot less pavilion facets, my design. So hopefully, I haven't test cut that, but I think it'll work out pretty well. Well, yep. Gee, we're still talking about fastening. We might as well, while people have joined in, with the square designs. I'm going to tell you, I think they're pretty hard to do. squares. It's just getting every side perfect. If one side's a little bit, you cut deeper, or one side's a bit longer, then when you get to faceting the crown, all sorts of issues end up. You never get the table aligned. That's one of the biggest issues. You'll find that even on a step cut square, getting everything to meet up perfectly is. And I've done. It's a funny thing with squares. You can get out your calipers. These things here. Get out your calipers. You can even get a precision caliper out. Measure the sides, and it's still, it can still end up being a little bit off center when you cut the crown. Really hard to do. I noticed my mentor, he cut a step square for last year's Jamboree, and he got 99.6, something like that, out of 100. I'm thinking, gee, that's darn good on a square. Yeah, look, I don't know. Squares, I think, are harder. Rounds are easier. Elliptical shapes aren't that easy. I still think a good square can really be challenging. The square Portuguese, the Portuguese square, I found pretty easy, but the last one I did, that George Beard one, just the meat points on the crown just took some doing. Yeah, when you do square step cuts, you usually do need to, well, what I find now, I do it different, but you do have to often float in the steps to make it meet. And what I do now, I actually, on the secondary transfer, I actually make this line up to the plate. I don't lock in my dop. I just spin it around so it's just barely touching the master lap at 90 degrees. So the side is sitting perfectly level. That does help a lot. So hopefully when I get this new transfer jig, it'll be a lot better aligned, because I'm finding my transfer jig is not 100% accurate, because it's kind of a spring-loaded transfer jig. So when you lock it down, it just pushes a little bit over slightly. But I found that just by lowering the fastening head down at 90 degrees and just getting the side dead bang on the flat of your master lap. I'll put a little bit of grease on the master lap here, so it's just barely touching, so I can see when it's touching the grease and it's marking, the base of the gem. That's how I align it. But I wouldn't bother with rounds. By the way, with the Cleopatra's Eye, I did align it that way too. I didn't rely on my transfer jig to have perfect alignment. I actually aligned the corners, so I rotated my dop, aligned the corner so it was flat on the master lap, and then I locked it in from the top so I could get perfect alignment on the corners. That's one of the things for those people who try out Tutankhamun's Eye or the easy modified Cleopatra's Eye, or even the other one that I did. To get that design right, it's all about the accuracy on the four corners. If you cut down too deep on one of the corner facets as you go in to cut the crown, and you'll be okay on the C1, C2, C3, but by the time you get onto C4, particularly C7 and 8, because I've done this once in the past, everything will start to, go out of proportion as you get closer to the eye. If you can get those four corner facets bang on, then you're in with a pretty good chance of getting that design done. Also, when you're floating in the facets, you're going to have to write down each angle, so as you go to polish them in. I found doing particularly on the crown, I would advise on the Cleopatra's Eye that you do the first set of facets and polish those in to a full polish. Do your second set, do a full polish, and do that all the way up to the C8 facets and the table. So just reading some of these questions. We were supposed to stop 10, 15 minutes ago. Regarding your last video conversation about faceting machine lead times, I reckon they're going to get longer. I think things are not going to improve. I think that things are going to get a lot worse. Mentioned earlier that I don't think the Gem Master will be in production by June, July. One of my subscribers told me that they had issues just finding parts still. You'd think if you're going to take over a particular company and you requisition all the parts and the diagrams, all the molds that you need, you'd kind of think before you took over that you'd make sure you'd have everything off them. But when you're missing half the machine assembly, it's pretty hard to make a machine based on the previous model. But I wouldn't. That's an interesting story. That'll Australia need to get their act together. It's pretty bloody bad what's going on. And I know a lot of people they're supporting. Oh, they're such a great company. This Molding Queen and that this other company is a great. Well, we never used to be like this in Australia. I mean, you either made something within a month or two and get it out onto the shop floor, but now these days, oh, it's a 3-month wait. Sorry, mate. Oh, it's a 6-month wait. And then they don't answer the phones. All this dodgy. I reckon it's just dodgy stuff. I don't like it. I work for myself. There's no way I'd ever treat any of my clients, my students like that and play that type of game. Sorry, I can't turn up today. I'll turn up next week. Sorry, I can't turn up next week. I'll turn up next month. It's just ridiculous stuff. I get my topper laps from eBay, and I can send you a link, Tam, if you like. The only thing I'm going to say is that I'm still waiting on my pre-polished laps. So I think I ordered 2 weeks ago. So I got mine on eBay Australia, but you can. I'll send you a link where I got my last lot from. Usually it's on its way. I can actually see on the tracking that it's been sent, so it's got through customs. But things are taking a lot longer now than ever with postage. So if you got them within a month, I think you might be doing okay. But I'll send you a link tomorrow when I get back online. They cost me I got them for around $30. So they hadn't gone up in price much. Excuse me. With these Chinese toppers, I did notice that John got his. I ordered mine before him. He got his within literally less than a week, and mine took 2 weeks. And so you guys have a better postal system. So if you get them within a few weeks, I think you'll be doing well. Occasionally you get the odd lap I found with the Chinese ones, not too often. I think out of all the packs that I bought, I've had one that was a 600 grit lap, and it must have had like a particle of diamond in it that was just way too coarse or had some contamination already bonded in the lap and it caused scratching. But really that's only ever been one lap out of all of them. So that's not too bad. So I've only ever had to toss that one lap. It only costs about $4 or so. How's your copper lap going, John? Have you tried it yet? Just looking at the question. It's about $30 a set, Tam. So you'll get 4 in a set. They range from a 3,000 all the way up to a 600. So you get a 600, 800, which is really unusual, but that's a really darn good lap, the 800 grit. Then you'll get a 1,200 and then a 3,000. So what will happen, the 1200 and 3000, obviously they're heading towards your pre-polished laps. Definitely the 3000 will become your pre-polish, but after a while, the 1200 with a bit of use over a month, several months, will become another good pre-polish lap. I've got a couple 800s that ended up being awesome pre-polish laps, but only on cubic zirconia. So that eventually they wear out. But what you do, you keep all your old laps. That's why I've got so many behind me here, because your old ones become, the course laps become good pre-polish laps. If you understand that, like how much wear they get after a while, they really turn out well. Yeah, so I'm in the same boat. I'm waiting on a 1200 and 3000. It's funny, you'll find these laps are pretty cheap, like $25 or $30 Australian. So you'll probably get them for about $20 or even less US. But you always find that 3000, 1200, particularly 3000, you'll burn those up a lot quicker. That once you start doing a fair bit of pre-polishing, you tend to get. Oh, look, I've had 3000s last 3, 4, 5 months, maybe longer. Sometimes you get a really great run, sometimes you don't. Depends on the material. I find that when you're pre-polishing cubic zirconia, you really do go through more of these pre-polish laps. And some of this cubic zirconia I've pre-polished with big pieces. Different. If you're only cutting up to 10 mil stones, then they'll probably last a heck of a long time. So I think I've answered the replacement issue just then. Let's see what people are saying. Yeah, look at the question about how long does a lap last. It's a little bit like how long is a string. It depends on the size of the gems you cut and the type of gem you do facet. Softer gems, they'll probably, if you're cutting one a week, that's 6 to 10 millimeters, they'll last a long time. The minute you start cutting 15 millimeter cubic zirconia, big things, and really hard gems like synthetic sapphire or the spinels, anything that's in that really hard synthetic gem department, you tend to find the discs tend to wear out a bit quicker. Look, I found with the really coarse laps, in terms of longevity, I've got 100 grit lap. It's over 4 years old. Done a lot of pre-forming on that. I've still got a 240 lap. It's about 4 years old. It's had it forever. That one's getting a bit more worn, but still works. But yeah, it all depends on how much cutting you do. You should get many months out of them. It's not like they're going to last a week. So John's ordered spares. Look, because they're so cheap, if you bought every 3 months or every 2 months just a pack and did that over a year, you're going to have so many discs. You could do probably 3, 4 years faceting, weekly, every day, a couple of hours, because they will last a long time. Yeah, so just reading the comment from Tony. Yeah, most of the course laps, once you get into a 180, 240, they're going to last quite a few years. 600s can last. They tend to last me over 6 months. So, John, you've obviously ordered another set of Chinese toppers. Yeah, it's always good to have. Yeah, so I know what you're doing. You're buying spares, so when something needs replacing, you don't need to wait, which is a good idea. Actually, it's no point just letting things run out and then buy it. As I mentioned earlier, I do think that some of these products, because they're all imported, they're going to get. You want to make sure you got plenty of diamond grit and all sorts of things. I'm still waiting on a few things. Yeah, I tell you, I'm reading a comment by Ariel about Florida. I actually got sunburned today. Just don't know, you probably can't tell, but I'm actually getting browner with a suntan. Was that my face feels really burnt? I still wore a hat, didn't wear any sunscreen, but I have to admit, in fact, going out in the garden is when you go out gardening where I live. Um, gee, it's tough. Gee, it's a tough life. The insects and the sun, and by golly, I said to my wife, I said, there is no way I'm going to be living here when I'm 65. Australia is no doubt. It is. I finding it's just getting. It's so much hotter than every year. It's just our summers get hotter. When I had a summer break, I spent most of the month indoors. I, I never used to do this. I mean, because it was that hot and was that many fires going on, and there was so much smoke outside, so you didn't want to go walking outside anyway. Um, really got to the point that I want to find somewhere cooler to live in Australia, maybe Tasmania. Tasmania, but I live fairly far south. In Victoria is quite a southern state, so we're supposed to be one of the cooler states. But by golly, it's hot. I've maybe got to move towards the coastal area of Victoria. Hi, Bryce. I can't look. I know nothing really much about Aussie Opal. I've made a few cabs at my gem club. I've got a little bit of opal, boulder opal, and some other opal, white opal from White Cliffs, and probably done about 3 or 4 cabs in opal. But I really don't know much about the quality, to be honest. The average person who's like does a little bit of cabbing, and you sort of haven't gone around buying or collecting the opal when it was freely available 30, 40 years ago. It's really hard to get quality opal. Most of it's what I've had, way too much sand in the opal. So it looks okay. And then you start, cutting the opal in a cab, and all you're doing is hitting sand patch after sand patch. I really do think for the average person who wants to do a bit of cabochoning in opal, you really got to spend a lot of time with someone who's been buying it and making cabochons, who's got a lot of experience. Because from my perspective, if someone sold me an opal in Australia and said, "Oh, this is a really high quality opal," most likely I'll be sold a dud, and you'll never get anything out of it. To me, the opal's a little bit like faceting. You kind of get really specialized in cutting a gem, and you can understand what gems will work really well, easy to cut, what'll polish well. But opals are totally different. I faceted a bit of fire opal before, so I know what will happen when I'm cutting fire opal. Cut Wellow opal several times now. That I kind of understand the faceting of an opal, but Australian opal, understanding the quality of it. All I know is that the black opal with the beautiful blues and the reds with the black potch is the most desirable from Cooper Pedy, of Lightning Ridge, I believe it comes from. So that I understand, but if someone said, "Oh, this bit of opal is worth $20,000," and another bit that looks similar is worth $500,000, I probably wouldn't know the difference. Yeah, so I know, like, I think some of you guys do a fair bit of cabbing. You probably know more than I do, a lot more than I do about opal. I think that I think finding good opal for the average person in Australia is pretty much non-existent. Those sitting on a good claim would be, would even then it'd be hard to find quality opal. It's still fairly much from what I understand, it's still very much underpriced, our opal, for the amount of it that is currently available. Done synthetic spinel. I actually do have some natural spinel. I think it's going to facet exactly the same as zircon or sapphire. I don't think it's going to be a lot of difference. It's a corundum, part of the corundum family, spinel. So it's going to be like faceting sapphire. I don't expect it to be polishing or cutting any different. I'll just read some of these questions. Huh. What do Aussies have? What kind of rough do Aussies have a hard time getting? Emeralds, yeah, probably almost. Sunstones aren't too bad. You can sort of get those. Well, you can get the clear ones. Once they've got a bit of pink in them, red, green, then that's almost impossible to get those. Thanks to Tam, I've got a few nice ones, but I've never seen them on the market, to be honest. I'll tell you what, it's really hard to get in Australia is nice lighter coloured garnets. Our garnets tend to be a bit on the dark side, but it's not so much. You can get lighter ones, but they're usually smaller umber garnets. But to get anything over 6 carats, 6 to 10 carats of a nice light, say a nice light rose type of color would be good to get hold of. Don't see that. Most of the dark garnet we have, even our Australian garnet's a bit on the dark side. That's one gem I have really. It's not that you struggle to cut it, but you struggle to get good light penetration through it. They're just a little bit too dark. And even if you cut them at a very low angle, they still wouldn't emit enough light. It does seem in Australia you can get hold of peridot, but anything that's anything that tends to be a green, but a lighter green emeraldy color, even in the synthetic gems, is kind of hard to get hold of. But not only that, very expensive. For example, synthetic green sapphire is not that cheap. But not only is it not that cheap, I've yet to find a source that you could get, reasonable price. It's always very expensive. Green seems to be the most expensive color of all, even in cubic zirconia. If you want to buy the emerald variety, I know, like, you're going to spend $400, US, maybe 500 a kilo. Depends on the way the stock market is. That's one of the things I should mention. If you're buying, those people sort of video where I buy cubic zirconia, the price of it fluctuates on the world market. So what the Chinese do, that everything's hinged on the US greenback. So when they sell a kilo of cubic zirconia, one day could be, for example, $30 a kilo, and then you say, yeah, that's great, I'll buy it. And then 2 days later, they have to check up what the US dollar's worth and according to their currency. And then it can all of a sudden be $35 a kilo. So when you're paying for example, Tanzanite, the Tanzanite look, I wouldn't buy it because it's everything's in US dollars. So even though a kilo for $300 US sounds okay, it's not okay because that's like $500 or $600, and then you've got to pay postage, and you end up with a lot of Tanzanite CZ, but it's still, from where I sit, I still find $500 or $600 a lot of money, even if it's a kilo of this stuff. And most likely you can't even use a kilo. You wouldn't get through it, and I don't. It would be hard to sell even to other people. You sell 100 grams, and you've got to say, well, that's going to cost you $100 or something. So I'm talking about cubic zirconia Tanzanite color, Ariel. It's what happens with certain colors in cubic zirconia. It's the actual topaz blue is not too bad. I think it's around $250 US a kilo from last time I checked. The Tanzanite, the good quality, was over 400, 500 US. And then the emerald's a similar price, 400 or 500 US per kilo. And the minimum they do sell it is kind of a kilo. And then you pay $27 postage, which is 27 Australian. But by the time you convert $400 or $500 US to Australian currency, it's a lot of money. Too much money for me to be. And you only want to cut a few gems out of it. You don't want to cut hundreds of gems. So with other colors like the canary yellows, the champagnes, there's a garnet red, there's a ruby red. They're all relatively cheap, anywhere between $25 to $35. Probably a bit more now because Australian dollar is so low. So maybe you're paying $40 to $50. And then, sorry, that's US, so $40 US, which works out probably 75 Australian or 70 Australian for a kilo, and then another $20 odd US for postage. So it brings it up to $100 a kilo with most cubic zirconia, which is not bad. Because if you buy synthetics in small batches off eBay, you're paying a lot more per gram. You kind of pay a lot less if you buy it in bulk. And it's not too, I mean, for 1 kilo of cubic zirconia, I've got different colors, but I've never used the full lot of my color range. So I usually just give bits away to people. If they need some, I just cut off a bit. I don't cut it. I found it pretty hard to cut on my diamond saw because they come in fairly big chunks. So I usually go to the Gem Club. Okay, everyone, I'm going to head off now. Went a lot longer than I imagined this session. It's good to catch up with you all. Till next time. I hopefully have this gem finished by then. I'm going to make a video on some of these minerals and gems that one of the guys out of my Gem Club gave me not that long ago. I haven't even looked in the box because it's a bit of a mystery box. I'll make a video of that because I need a break from gardening. So I'll do another day or so of gardening. Then I'll make another video maybe on the weekend. Just need to do something different. So probably do another. I'd like to finish off this gem. I'm really tired of doing doing live streams of the same gem, but I would like to start another design soon, which wouldn't mind trying either the Tutankhamun's eye or the Eye of Horus. None of them have been tested, but by then, hopefully, John has done his and he can show me how he went. So I'm going to head off. So everyone who joined today, thank you for joining in. And until next time, stay safe and healthy. And it's bye for now. I'll see you later. Bye.